is to recommend some new members to our rapid response subcommittee. That rapid response committee contains Lonnie Radke, Dana Nichols, and myself, and used to also include Lawton Elliott DeAngelis and Eric. It flew out. Eric
Osterberg.
Osterberg, thank you. Who used to live in Klamath Falls. And we need to add a couple more members. So we gathered some information from you all through a survey to get some nominations. Our nominations were reviewed by our rapid response committee members, and taking into account some of the perspectives that we lost on the committee when our other two members left, we have some recommendations. So I'm going to turn it to Lonnie to help recommend Noel Mickelmary and Zhao Zhang, now Posadas. So sorry, Zhao, I have your former last name.
No worries. Thank you.
Written on there. So Lonnie.
Thank you. Hi, I think, am I doing this in the form of a recommendation?
Yeah, so what we're doing is the subcommittee is going to recommend to the larger committee who we would like and why to add to the committee, and then Chris will lead us through our voting process.
I think, and I'm happy to talk about Dana, Leanne, and I would like to recommend adding Noel Mickelberry and Zhao, is it Posadas?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Lonnie.
And I'm sorry, I'm en route in my meeting and I don't have all their background information, but I know that that we have talked about it internally, and we think that they would be excellent additions to our subcommittee, where we evaluate applications for people who are applying for rapid response funding up to $500,000 to make safety improvements. So I would like to recommend that they be added to our subcommittees.
And I'll provide a little bit more detail that's written on the slide that Lonnie's on her phone and can't see, but it's we were looking for some experience from a Safe Routes to School practitioner and a representative from diverse school districts. And so Zhao and Noel both have some of that Safe Routes to School practitioner background. And Zhao works with the David Douglas School District, which is a pretty diverse school district in Oregon. So any questions?
Leanne, could you stop screen sharing so we can see everyone, please, just for a moment? Thank you. Okay, don't see any questions. Could the committee, if you remember from every single meeting we've had, approve? I fully support this decision moving forward. Have not fully supportive, but can live with it, need some more discussion. So if I could see those digits, please. Seeing approval all around. And Zhao, I'm sorry, I just can't see. I think your name. Thank you. All right. Well, great. Congratulations to Zhao and Noel. Thank you. So moving on, our next call for digits is the last month's draft notes for the SRAC. Are there any comments or corrections in the notes? Okay, not hearing any. So may I see again your opposable thumbs? Okay, great. Danny, I'm sorry, I just can't, I think it's behind your name.
No, I was gonna say, should I vote if I wasn't here?
Thank you for pointing that out. No, I think you're fine. I think we've got it. Okay, let's move forward. Thank you.
Share the screen one more time.
Thank you.
Our next piece of business is to go over the 2022 schedule, also based on the results that we got from your the poll that we sent out, and running this through our chair, Rob Interfeld, and vice chair Carolina Ureta Gonzalez. We've decided to keep it simple based on a lot of the responses we got back, which is don't fix what's not broken. And so our 2022 schedule will be very similar to our 2021 schedule. We're gonna keep the third Thursday as the date and the 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. time slot. We will have a little bit of a swap in the months. Usually we do every other month, but there are some decisions we need to make close to each other in March and April. So those two meetings will be close to each other, and then we'll have a bigger gap between April and July. And based on your feedback from in-person versus virtual, we thought we would try a couple of in-person options while still always having a virtual option for folks to be able to call in if they need to. And trying to push that a little further down the line so that we can kind of see what happens pandemic-wise between now and then. But our proposal is that our July meeting be an in-person meeting, that meeting, and then that we would have an optional in-person site visit, again, planned for October, one that we had to cancel this past October. So I have 2 in-person opportunities and 5 online opportunities. And you can see in the slide a couple of the reasons that we heard for making that determination, with the chair and the vice chair taking all of your information into account. So I want to pause here for just questions or any big red flags. My next step will be to go ahead and schedule the meeting invitations and send them out early next week. So, but we'd love to pause here and see if there are any red flags or any questions.
No red flags or anything. I just, I thought I might point out that it's been really valuable for the meetings that are not local to have an electronic option, since now, you know, it's funny when you're on the other side of this, it looks different. You know, when I was a student, we were talking about providing childcare at planning meetings, and now I'm actually a planner, and childcare is the biggest difficulty in trying to even travel. You know, if I have to stay one night, I have to figure out what to do with the kid. So it's not even just in the meetings that I plan.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that perspective. And that's also my reason for waiting till July. I'm hoping that the hybrid options for meetings, we let a couple of other smart people figure out the best practices, and then by July we'll have a really good option, so that there's always ways for people to engage from a distance. And some of the reasons that came up for that too are things like greenhouse gas reduction as well, like some big goals of ODOT and of this committee. So like we can help save the planet by working from home. So so that was sort of the reason for some of this style of balance. All right, well, feel free to send me, call me or send me any emails if you have other things that sort of come up, but I'm gonna kind of move forward with this for 2022 and start sending out those calendar invitations. So thank you very much for your input. It was really helpful whenever we were setting this up.
Leanne, I am not seeing any public comment requests in the chat box. I'm just gonna review this one more time.
I also didn't see any, so maybe if it's in there and we miss it, if you could pop a note really quickly in there so we can catch you.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to Robin.
All right, our next presenter is Robin Wilcox, who works here at Oregon Department of Transportation. She's going to be presenting on the strategic action plan implementation, and I will share my screen so you can see her slides. Am I sharing? No.
We can see the slides.
You can see them? Okay, great. My brain's not quite clicking today, and neither is anything else. So welcome to my basement, everybody. All right, passing it on to Robin.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks again. Really nice to meet you all. Again, my name is Robin Wilcox, and I work with Leanne in the policy and implementation team in the public transportation division at ODOT. I am working on the kind of shepherding the strategic action planning implementation work that we are doing for our division through the process and ultimately across the finish line. Go to the next slide, Leanne. So our goal for the conversation today is to really build a shared understanding of the progress that we've made to date and give you all an opportunity to ask questions about some of that work, as well as questions you have on the strategic action plan, if you've got any. As it says here, the strategic action plan envisions a modern transportation system that is equitable, future-focused, and fully funded. There are 3 priorities in the strategic action plan. With each of those priorities, there is a list of goals, if you've had a chance to look through there. But the strategic outcomes are really the heart of what makes it an action plan. They're the places where there's intersectionality and overlap between each of those priorities and the subsequent goals. So in the public transportation division, we are focused on strategic outcome number 5. That's improve access to active and public transportation. There's a metric associated with that. So the timeline and horizon, this is not a long-term planning exercise. This is a very near-term action plan. So by the end of 2023, we'll know we're successful if a percentage of the agency funding that's dedicated to projects and programs that improve equitable access to walking, biking, and transit has increased. Go to the next slide. And there are 4 in the action plan. There are 4 implementing actions that happen over between 2021 and 2023. So for 2021, we're working on 2 of these implementing actions, and those are the ones that are shown on the screen. So developing the baseline understanding of the funding, basically how are we doing now, and developing a system for tracking that change over time and communicating that change over time. Will be what we've got wrapped up by the end of 2021 in terms of the baseline piece. I'll talk a little bit more about a couple of other milestones that are in that one too. And then most of the heart of our conversation here today is around this work that we're doing in the second implementing action there. So develop and implement the funding prioritization process of our existing programs with an eye towards how can we improve access for marginalized communities. So we've got a series of questions that we'll go through for each of our programs that are from our equity lens or tool, and just help build a better understanding for what we're doing right now and how we're doing it. Next slide. The program inventories. So everything within PTD is like all of the programs that we administer are all part of our program inventory that we're evaluating. These are all of our transit programs, public transportation, all of the bicycle and pedestrian programs, which include safe routes to school, transportation options, and passenger rail. What's actually in the inventory, if you go to the next slide, Leanne, is just a laundry list of some of the basic things like program name, source of the funding, how flexible can we be with the distribution criteria, timeline, purpose of the program, all those kinds of things. But one of the things that we're also looking at is like the opportunities within this timeframe horizon to make any sort of changes. So discretionary grant programs and projects that we directly administer with ODOT are the places where we most likely have the ability to influence within the timeframe of the strategic action plan. I think the good news as it relates to safe routes to school is you all have already been doing a lot of that work, and you've already been considering equity and leading with race through all the work that you're doing. The other piece of this is noting kind of what the level of or where the criteria for these discretionary grant programs is set. So in some cases it comes to us and it's set at a federal level, and having any ability to influence that is a much longer term conversation. On the opposite end of that spectrum are programs that we routinely look at and work with our advisory committees to change grant criteria almost on a cyclical basis. We've also got some things that come to us through statute, and then other places where we need the permission or authority from Oregon Transportation Commission to make changes in the program. So that's all part of what we're doing in terms of the program inventory. I'm going to just pause there for a second to see if anybody has any burning questions on that before we shift gears and shift over into the discussion around the equity lens. Cool. Let's see, any questions there, so we can shift to the next slide, Leanne. All right, so just to tee up before we get into the questions that are in the lens, first piece here is what does an equity lens do? What's the goal? This is really a tool for us, and we've been having lots of these conversations internally too, to just change our mental model and change how we're thinking things, interrupt some of our biases, look for opportunities to pivot some of our patterns internally and externally. But we're also using this and considering this as an opportunity to, through these changes, highlight where some opportunities are to build and strengthen relationships with internal and external partners, and think about things that we maybe haven't thought of before, or think about things in a different way from how we've been thinking about them all along. Next slide.
Awesome. I want to pause just for 1 second. Chris, we actually do have a question in the chat. Do you feel like we should hold questions, or go ahead and?
Why don't we get through the presentation and then we can do it all at once for Robin.
All right. Thank you for your question, Kimberly, and we'll do all the questions all at once. Appreciate it.
Now I'm confused about where. Okay. So equity lens essentials. Thanks. The other piece of this is to help us understand why we're doing something this way instead of that way. And again, I think you all went through that when you went through the series of whys for the work that you're doing. So you may be ahead in some cases of some of the other programmatic groups that we're having this conversation with. But really kind of homing in and understanding like what are the decisions being made, who is being considered as we're making those decisions, who or what is guiding the decision, and how are they doing that, and then getting to the place where we're thinking about some of the benefits and the burdens and how we can make sure that if we're missing something, we note that and we have an opportunity to think about it, or to think about things, just as I said before, a little bit differently. So the goal with the equity lens is to get us all to start thinking about, or to think about things differently, and to also build a sense of empowerment. Like we don't have to always rely on other people to solve some of these questions for us. These are things we can ask ourselves almost at any point in time. Next slide. So these are the questions from the ODOT social equity lens. This is a relatively kind of newly finalized or refined tool, but over the past year, we've been looking at several other similar equity lenses and tools. So we're not starting this work from scratch. There's a lot of overlap. I hope that you had a chance to look through the questions. I don't want to read them to you, so the first question that you see on your screen, this question is really like we're starting with this one intentionally. It's to raise awareness that if we're not or haven't directly involved folks from historically excluded communities, but we made some assumptions on their behalf, like why did we make that assumption? Or maybe some of our partners and some of the folks on the advisory committees do have direct relationships. So it's just an opportunity to really kind of think collectively about how we involved folks and who we involved, and to pick up if there are any gaps in places where we do need to do some intentional outreach. The second bullet point really focuses in on these, the idea around including historically excluded communities as early in the process as possible, because as you all have been discussing, if we can ensure that everybody has what they need to at least be able to access basic needs, then ultimately we can rest assured that everybody is better off and we're all going to be served. This is a little bit different from kind of the standard thinking that's around doing the most good for the most amount of people. The third bullet point there, especially in the case of Safe Routes to School, we don't have to only use the Transportation Disadvantaged Population Index map to answer this question. There's a number of other tools, and Safe Routes is, you're already focusing in on the schools with the highest need across the state, and by and large hitting some of these high transportation disadvantaged population index areas already. But then also taking that one step further is the second half of that question there. And thinking about this as a tool for understanding where maybe we need to strengthen some of the partnerships, or to expand maybe some of the programmatic pieces, or help get other services related to like economic or health benefits that those communities also need. And then the last bullet point, it's a slightly different color because this is like the big, meaty, important question. So this is there an opportunity through this program to increase safety or access for folks that have been historically excluded? But it also, needs to acknowledge that all these shifts also have other impacts. So sometimes we may identify an opportunity, but there may be a reality that we don't have the funding, or we don't have the time to do that right now, or trying to do something more might put an extra level of burden on, in this case, like the school or folks that are getting the funding. And that's okay. This is all about trade-offs. And then I think the last slide, so this is just the part of our conversation, but I do want to switch it back to the social equity question. So I just wanted to have a little bit of time with this committee to just find out if you've got questions about the questions in the equity lens, or questions about how, maybe moving forward, the committee could do this, or give you an opportunity to share how you've already been doing this.
So Robin, if I could chime in just quickly, and one of the questions came in the chat box about the Build Back Better and the over $1 billion coming to Oregon. Will those funding mechanisms all go through this filter as part of the inventory?
That is a great question. I mean, so this
I think Susan can also chime in as well. She's got her hand up. So Robin, if you want to start, and we'll let Susan wrap it up.
Yeah, sure. So in the general sense, like this is ODOT's tool. So everybody at ODOT is encouraged to use these to be able to answer this question, or these questions. PTD is also really focusing on these questions. So my short answer is yes, and Susan can maybe provide some more details if we want to right now.
Yeah, hi guys, Susan Pythman, ODOT staff. I don't want to take up too much time on this, but the infrastructure bill that passed recently, there are a couple edits to the Safe Routes to School policy in the bill. The amount of money that is coming is generally already like programmed out into specific programs, except there is more money going into the Oregon Community Paths program, which will undergo this equity lens review that Robin's describing. The other piece that's really important is there's roughly about 300 or 400 million of flexible funds that will be a big discussion with the Oregon Transportation Commission over the next several months as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Kimberly, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Awesome, thank you. I also, before we jump in, I want to mention that ODOT having an equity lens is really helpful for me when thinking about Safe Routes to School. And my intention is to bring these committees, these questions back to this committee in January when we do our debrief around how the year went and how we want to refocus for 2022. So this committee will get to see these questions again after you've had a chance to digest them, because I'll bet I didn't get you the materials in enough in advance for anyone had a chance to read these before this meeting. So so we're not asking you to answer these questions for this our program now. We will be looking at this in January. And just wanted to note that I do think that this committee has been using our own lens for the past year in creating our scoring criteria that that has a really high focus on equity. So I think we've been doing the work in a slightly different way, and I'd like to use this equity lens as a way to sort of codify it into our program moving forward as part of our debrief. So that's my spiel before we get into and we also want to hear what questions you have about this lens. It'll help us set up our discussion in January.
So perhaps the next slide there, I think there were some group discussion questions.
Well, the next slide just says what questions do you have about the questions. That's why I was thinking it would be helpful if you could keep the question on the screen.
Wait, sorry. There we go. Back to that.
Great. Are there any other thoughts or comments?
I raised my hand. Can I
Yes,
ask a couple
well, I'm
questions?
sorry, I didn't do that. Thank you.
No problem. Two questions. One, clarifying, you mentioned that this lens is being used across ODOT. So this isn't just for I was trying to go back through your slides of all the different areas. All projects and programs will be using this lens. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We're all, like, everybody at ODOT is being encouraged to use this lens. It's been applied, through the STIP, like they're actively scoping projects right now, and they're looking at that.
Right. Yeah, so more on the discretionary, the funding that you all have more control over. And then a second question is actually also about the influx of funding from the federal government, because I do feel like that those initial goals of like increasing an investment in active transportation, you all have kind of already achieved that because due to the influx of funding. So I guess I would wonder if I would just put a point that it'd be great to see maybe something around the lines of like active transportation increasing as a proportion in ODOT's overall funding or something like that versus just an increase, because I feel like you already can kind of check that off. And this is all great, like all the work is awesome that you're doing to prioritize and better understand investments, but that overall goal seems like it will be met. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, so that's a great question. There's a couple pieces, and Susan and others are much more the expert on the federal funding than I am. But one of the pieces to kind of keep in mind is there's more money coming in for public and active transportation. There's more money coming toward the agency in general. The other piece with the equity lens component of it is that it's more of this intentionality. Like, we know that public and active transportation really provides, a lot of the pieces of equity in the transportation network, but we want to be really intentional moving forward about how can we do that even better, and even with a more intention focus on equity. So just because we're getting more money, we don't need to keep doing that in the same way. This is a tool to help us understand that too.
Thank you, Carolina, and then Danny, please.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, I have a question that's coming up around implementation of these questions, and whether, like, if there's a way to measure not just the impact, but like what the answers are. So I'm just thinking like that ODOT will have various program staff going through and answering these questions. Is there, guidance, like, for example, even just the first one, which is about public involvement, there's different theory on like what it means to be informed, consulted, or involved. And, there's just tons of theory and books and research around community engagement. So is there something that you're trying to hit? Like, are you trying to, have programs be at a certain level when it comes to these types of questions, or are these just more general, let's have program staff kind of think through this, and there's no accountability almost to these questions. It's like whatever program staff answer, that's the answer. Does that make sense? And then I'm just wondering how just your evaluation, just a little bit more about the evaluation around these questions, like the
Yeah, I
answers specifically and the changes they make.
Yeah, I understand what you're. I think I understand what you're getting at. So the initial round of questioning, there isn't. I mean, there's no judgment associated with it. It is very much like intended to capture like, here's what it is, and to help highlight awareness around opportunities to do things differently. I think the accountability comes in with our, working with this committee and doing that with a level of transparency that enables you all to also be a partner in this and say, hey, you've highlighted this, how are you following up on that kind of feedback? So the accountability comes in with the transparency and the partnerships through not just these advisory committees and the work that you all do, but we'll also be working with MPOs and as we move forward in other elements of the strategic action planning, have some intentional opportunities for folks to engage to in a broader SAP work.
So Robin, excuse me, if there are additional questions or follow-up questions, just so we can keep our agenda moving forward, will we work through Leanne to get some additional questions to you?
Yeah, if folks have questions, then they're certainly encouraged to bring those forward through Leanne. We'll come back to this committee, really, like Leanne mentioned, use these questions as you work through the follow-up and evaluation process, but you're welcome to provide input. Leanne, I also interviewed Leanne and got some initial answers to the questions on behalf of the Safe Routes to School program, so there'll certainly be some involvement.
Great. And then just two quick things. Carolina, later on in the agenda, there is a discussion of the power analysis and that type of on the IAP2 scale where communities are being consulted or empowered or involved. Danny, why don't we do one more question and then we have to move the agenda along because we really do have a lot to cover.
I had a pretty similar question to Carolina, and basically it's like, okay, what are the measures of success, and like how do you say like we have done this? Essentially, is it just asking the questions? Because I think we're kind of, I don't know, we're at a point in this work where just like thinking about it isn't enough, right? Like action is necessary. And
right.
So I would say that like asking a question is the start, and then like what does it look like to be successful in following through?
Right. Yeah. And so through the strategic action planning work, there are two other implementing actions. We're just in the first piece of evaluating the programs and asking ourselves these questions to get a baseline for where we are right now. There's a third implementing action that's working on a statewide priority multimodal network. And then the fourth piece, which is where we integrate. So we put the where's the priority network together with the programmatic funding opportunities and look at where those things intersect. And so that's where some of that work, I think that you're asking about, Danny, and others, that's where that will come in, and that accountability also shows up.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn to the chair and vice chair. Are we ready to move on to the next agenda item to keep us spot moving on? Yes, great. Okay, Leanne, thank you so much, Robin. I think this is a very active committee who's been thinking about, as you noted, for a very long time about this, and feel very strongly about not just asking questions, but seeing results about this, about all the equity thinking and work and delivery. With that, Leanne, I'm going to turn it to you.
Great. Just double checking, Carolina, that you didn't have anything that you wanted to add. Your hand is still raised, and so I just want to give you space if you want, or if it's just up for other things. Okay. Sorry. Oh, now we're moving into discussion and decisions on scoring matrices. So this is some work that we've been working on since pretty much January of this year, and we're at our final meeting to discuss today and make a decision around recommendations for the scoring matrices for the construction and education programs, which will be going out for solicitation in February of 2022. So just a reminder of what our guiding principles are. Here's where we started at the beginning of the year, and we've been using all of these principles to help guide us as we're making these decisions and choices. Also, we have, this is kind of a matrix of how we spend our time in the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. We spend most of our time working to define the criteria. And then staff uses that criteria to score grant applications, where we bring it back to you for your grants and projects recommendation. And then we spend a lot of our time kind of evaluating that program in the future using tools like the equity lens. In the past, we didn't have an equity lens, but we used a lot of those same values whenever we evaluated our programs in the past. So we're right smack in the middle of working with staff to define scoring criteria right now. And we've spent pretty much this whole year working on those priorities. Here, you've seen this slide before, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. It does have a lot of words on it, but we're trying to help orient folks in that we did start in January of 2021. All the way through now, really taking your input and incorporating it into the scoring criteria, the drafts of the scoring criteria. Also, since our last meeting, I was able to go to the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which Mavis and Lauren both sit on, to ask for their consultation as through our Safe Routes to School rule. It requires that we consult with the OTS, the OPEC, the Oregon Bike and Ped Advisory Committee, as well as the OTSC, the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee that Luis sits on. So we went there, got to do a presentation about all the great work you all are doing. What we heard from OPEC was there was some comments about the need for crossing guards at schools in neighborhoods. So I wanted to bring that feedback back to you all, that there is, that was a comment that we received at OPEC. Also, that they support the competitive and rapid response programs and outcomes. They really, I got to show them all of the projects that and a lot of the information that you've already seen around the evaluation of the past 2 funding cycles. And that at our last consultation, they asked for more sidewalks, and that was accomplished. Most of our projects do have a sidewalk component, and a lot of the photos of our completed projects are these beautiful long new sidewalks near schools. So mostly they had really wonderful things to say as part of that consultation.
And do you think we could pause to see if Mavis, as the representative on the SROC, has anything else to add?
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think she hit it pretty good. We were really focused on the fill-in factor, where you're going along with the sidewalk and then all of a sudden it ends and then the kids are walking in the street. So I think that's great. And then Leanne showed us a beautiful vision of all the projects that have been accomplished, and we're getting to have quite a number, and it's really exciting.
Thank you, Mavis. I'll keep moving because our next slide is leading us towards our decision about the construction scoring matrix. So based on the homework that we got back this last time, there were no changes. Between the last meeting and this meeting, we found out that all of our dreams were coming true, and all of the data that we wanted was going to be available from the Oregon Department of Education, and it is now available. And so we don't have to remove anything because of lack of data. So everything we wanted is there. We're going to have all the data ready for our applicants to use to apply for the program. So what you saw in homework and what you said was good and didn't provide or didn't have any red flags with is what I propose that we go for. So in general, members support the draft construction scoring criteria as written, as was sent home to you in your homework. A summary of the recommended updates to date. So starting from when we first started talking about the construction matrix until now are mostly small tweaks. We had some small tweaks to addressing transportation disparities where we added prioritization of students with disabilities and students from tribes. Small tweaks to crash risk factors where we put more weight to serious injury and more weight to 25-mile-per-hour speed. Small tweaks to proximity to schools where we added school attendance boundaries and supplemental busing as ways that people can receive more points. And small tweaks to the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee lenses that you generally put on in your meeting where you make your decisions. Clarification that these lenses are optional. We generally will provide you with options of what it would look like with no lenses, and then what the list would look like with the lenses that you've said that you would like to consider. And we added a small prioritization for unfunded applicants from previous rounds. So if you've applied multiple times, if you applied for the same project in a previous round, that's one of our additional lenses for a kind of a tiebreaker for projects at the funding, at the cut line, to encourage people to keep applying for those projects until we have the capacity to fund them.
It looks like Kim has a question. Or
Yes.
a comment.
Just quickly, and I'm trying to play catch up because I wasn't at the last meeting. Was in the scoring criteria still the reduced and free lunch line?
Yeah,
because
that's
in
the
Oregon,
most.
everybody gets free lunch now. So all students qualify. So I don't know how that data would be tracked.
That is something that I did not see as part of the school report cards for last year. This might be something that we need to figure out for the future. But as for the data that we would use, that was just released on October 7th, it still had multiple ranges.
Okay.
So what I would say is that's good to know. I didn't have that information. And my take would be we would use the data from the previous years, and then in the future, if this continues for all students to receive free and reduced lunch, which is a great policy, like I like that policy, we can use another indicator, which is basically income. Like we used that factor as a supplement for income. So we would use income instead of eligibility for free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
Thank you. That's really good. Sorry, it like threw me for a second, but like ultimately that's great news. Like I like feeding kids. It's a good idea.
My question is, this is Heidi. Kim, is that permanent, or is that just for the interim during COVID?
It's for this year, and it looks like it's for next year at this point. I don't think districts know, but I mean, that was all of last year. It's all of this school year. And I talked to our director of food service, and he said it looked like that was going to happen for next school year also, which is great. But he didn't think they were tracking the data this year. So I don't know if it'll be available for us.
Brock, do you have any thoughts on that? If you're any info on that?
Not at the moment. No, I'm sorry. I could look into it if you need me to.
It's up to Leanne. Would that be valuable?
I have the contact of the data folks at Oregon Department of Education. I have looked at the free and reduced lunch numbers from in the data that we got from them, and it was varied. So at this point, I don't think this is a problem for us. If it turns out that it is, I might contact Brock and some other folks I know at the Oregon Department of Education. And if it's something that we need to do a shift and find out actual income data from families as opposed to just eligibility for free and reduced lunch, that's something that we should easily be able to get. And so for our purposes, this is not a huge red flag, but this is something to know about. So I appreciate Brock's offer and maybe, but I don't think so right now. And I think Noelle had her hand up. I don't know if she still has something.
I was just going to say, I think for Title I designation, that's required by the federal government, and that's how, and it's 40% of families qualifying. So I think we would still, it might not be under free and reduced lunch, but there'd be a way to find out those qualifying factors required by the federal government.
Yeah. If all of a sudden all of our data just says everybody's at 100%, well, that'll be the red flag that this data set doesn't work for us anymore. If everybody gets the points, then it's not helpful to us, and we'll find the income data that we need.
Any other questions for Leanne or comments? And again, in looking at the homework, the discussion at our previous meeting and all the meetings since January added these comments, but there was nothing that came through in the homework significantly, or any comments actually on the construction. So with that, as a barometer, could we stop sharing screens? Great. So this is the point for the construction. And again, just to reiterate this, just for construction, we're moving into education next for our recommendation. But for construction recommendation, does the committee recommend staff moving forward with the scoring matrix as presented? Great. Zhao, I can't see you. Great. Congratulations. Construction criteria done, checkbox. All right, so now I think we have enough time to move into the discussion for education. And I know Heidi's going to go over it, but this was a pretty significant shift for the committee, and all the discussion and deliberation that took place over the past year of restructuring the funding for the grant side, so the 50% of the funds to distribute through a grant program. So Heidi, that's your lead in, and now you're coming on stage.
Trying to unmute. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris. And Chris alluded to some of the kudos that I was wanting to give the SRAC for willing to go through this process with me so far this year. I really wanted to move the program funding into something that was more equitable for the students they serve, but also more equitable for communities and agencies applying for these applications, in hopes that we get people to succeed from the start, rather than hoping they succeed like people that might have more resources. So hoping that this is a new era in terms of the education funding. So today I'm just going to go over this last batch of homework questions and staff answers, and discuss some of the changes I made to the scoring matrix based on your recommendations and feedback. And then we will ask you for your recommendation. Next slide.
Sorry.
Okay.
There you
go. So since we've covered a lot over the past year, and just want to summarize this for people joining in today. So the funding that we're talking about is 50% of the overall education funding. So the other 50 is towards statewide services for people who are funded and are not necessarily funded. And so this is Hannah will be giving an example of some of the funding that we're using for the statewide services in the other 50% bucket. But this 50% bucket is we're looking, rather than previous grants funding cycles, we had 3-year cycles of just one grant application that everybody and anybody applies for. And this is now looking at it from 3 different funding pathways. Funding tier 1 pathway is for new beginners or people who have not had education programming in such a long time that they are basically starting new. And so this would kind of build off the existing construction project identification program that Leanne has, but adds a deep dive into the education planning. So this essentially gives the folks who get this tier 1 grant would get $50,000 to $100,000 or $50,000 in consultation help at the very beginning of their grant. So their first 6 months to the year of a 2-year grant would be working with a in consultation with professionals to help build a stronger plan and goal and program strategy for that community. And then the second year would be them implementing some of those goals that were originally built through that implementation plan. So we're looking at a 2-year grant with a max of $150,000 to communities. Tier 2 would be what we know now as the education grants, except for rather than being 3 years, it's down to 2 years. And this allows us to fund more often and fund more projects more often. So we know that 3 years is a long time to wait if you didn't get the grant that you applied for. And so this is really made for programs who are ready to succeed. They've already done a lot of the pre-planning work or have already been working on Safe Routes to School programs, and they're just looking for that boost to get them more sustainable and help them to build their program.
Sorry.
Oops. So tier 2 would be a max of 100,000 over 2 years. And then tier 3 is for established programs who are pretty much ready to be sustainable completely without ODOT funding. They're looking for innovations and ways to either expand. So they may already be self-sustainable, they're just looking to expand, or they just need that final push of just a little bit of innovation to finalize their program or build more off of their program. So this would be like the most advanced tier, and that would be a max of 50,000 over 2 years. So that's the summary of culmination of what we have come up with based on the previous SRAC meetings. So next slide, please. So based off of that slide I just showed you, the question 1 on your homework was, are these descriptions clear? And for the most part, everyone that replied in their answers said, yes, it seems clear. Maybe write these out in full sentences, which we agree we'll do so in the application, as well as write them out when we do our outreach. The one thing that was not clear was what the term of applicants meant. And so what we mean by applicant is the applying agency or entity. So we'll make sure to make that clear on the application. And then there was a mention of it might be helpful to add how much funding is available per tier. And my answer to that is basically we left it vague because we really don't know. We have $1 million as part of that 50% bucket, and so over 2 years. And so if we divide the $1 million evenly into the 3 tiers, we may have one tier that's just undersubscribed. For example, innovation, we might only have a few people funded for that. So more funding can go be available for tier 1 or tier 2. So it's not entire till we go through this process, we're not going to be sure if spreading the money out evenly is what we should do. So we've kind of left it vague, but what we can say is that it's likely that we'll fund between 3 and 4 applicants per pathway. And I think that would be a fair way to kind of let people know, gauge how competitive it can be. Next slide. So in questions 2 and 3, I will note that we've made a change since the slides were last sent out to you guys and posted, mainly because I reviewed the answers back from the SRAC again and realized that, well, first I'll say the original question is getting at, and this is only for the tier 1 group for the Education Plus grants. So this is only pertaining to that. And the idea was to similarly like what Leanne did, similarly for the PIP, Leanne had this section for basically giving more points to communities that are smaller and have less resources. And that works when you're doing just one project at one school for one community, but doesn't necessarily work for education programming when you could be serving just one school for one community, but you could also see applicants applying multiple schools serving multiple communities, such as a county grant. So then how do you gauge their size of community that they're serving? And so that's problematic. A couple folks mentioned do away with the numbering of citizens in those areas and just go with MPO and non-MPO, which is what I was originally going to go with, because that kind of helps to clarify who has resources, extra resources for planning or help in organizing a coalition in their area. And that seems probably like a good solution to this, to make it a little more simplified. But then in looking more at the answers that the SRAC, Noelle brought up a good point, and we can discuss it further, but she basically mentioned that even if somebody is in an NPO, if that NPO is overtaxed in terms of capacity or funding, and they're serving a large group of people, that application or that applicant might not receive the kind of resources that we're anticipating they would receive. And so really this was just getting at trying to build more of an equitable bump up for folks that are smaller communities and don't have as many resources than for people who are larger communities that might get city or county resources to help them. And since it was only 5% of this, I figured we could just take this question out completely so it's not as messy, and put it as a factor in another question involving their the need, so that they could use that in the need. So I'll be showing you that in the next slides. So I basically moved the points from that question down to staff capacity, which I'll show you in the next couple slides. So I did make a little change of that after this. Just thinking more about this, I just feel like this would be way too messy in terms of all the diversity of diversity of applications and the communities they're serving. So next slide. So question 4 was pretty straightforward, just saying that at first we've had 5 letters of support, and I knew that would be too much for small communities, and I didn't want that to be a barrier for small communities, which is who we're trying to boost up, right? So we agreed, and so did all the SRAC members that answered the question. So we decreased it to 3 letters support. So you would have to have 3 letters or more to get a full score rather than 5. And the last question is, what other factors besides funding determine need for planning and SRTS education grant? And so this makes up about 30% of the, and this is only for the tier 1 group, and this makes up about 30% of their score. And so we really wanted to get as many factors from you guys that you think would be kind of an answer that these communities would give, or that this applicant would give, saying that besides lack of funding, what are other reasons that they are in most need of this? And it just will help to boost their them being competitive in terms of funding. So some of the answers are applicants may not have planners at all. They may have planners, but not paid to work on SRTS education. They have no other staff qualified to hire or administer a contract with an outside planner. They may have lack of local staff available to implement the program. Current capacity in general, current infrastructure issues, distance of students' homes to schools, parents' cars drop-offs, students using active transportation, estimate of parent, student, community desire to use active transportation. So if you can come up with any more factors that you think we could use, we would basically list these for the applicants to see, and it'll help them to see like what a complete answer to this question might be. So it'll be more of like either drop down questions to really get at the gravity of their need, or it could be an essay question, and the more of these that they can incorporate into their answer, the more complete that question would be. So since this is a large part of their score, we want to be able to offer them as many factors that they could speak to, since there's so many diverse communities and programs. So thank you for the feedback on this, and if you have more, we can take those into consideration when scoring this.
So Heidi, just to clarify on this, this particular response, the staff's recommendation is have a mix of that qualitative and quantitative so that applicants can tell the story and provide the broader context.
Yeah, so I'm thinking some of them might be like a drop down to kind of narrow down the level of need, and then have them write a small paragraph to kind of fully explain their level of need outside of just needing funding, and that's where they can include some of these factors. So it'll be a quantitative and qualitative answer, and then that way the pros and cons of having the quantitative drop down is that you can't get into those subtle little unique instances, and then the positive of having the drop down is that it's a very clear scoring criteria. So having a mix of both the quantitative and the qualitative, I think, offsets any kind of gray area that you might have with a question like this. So moving to the next slide, this is kind of a lot to go over, so I just wanted to summarize the changes visually and just show you how we've set it up. So looking on the left-hand side, you'll see the cross out of the size of community question. So I've completely just taken that out of the scoring matrix. And if you look down in that the first column, that's tier 1. First column of numbers is tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And so so all of the tiers, 40% of their score is that addressing transportation disparities question. So that will be the same exact method as Leanne's construction grants. And then we've taken out the size of the community question. And that 5% I've moved down, if you see in green, we've moved it down to dedicated staff time, as that's kind of a way to offset that percentage that's missing from the size of community. So next, the need of program. We, like I just mentioned, that's 30%, and that would be the drop down, a hybrid of drop down questions, and then also to a paragraph summary of the need. And in that we could look, they could mention the size of their community as part of that factor. So I feel like this streamlines the need question a little bit better than having it divided between size of community and need for the program. Again, we changed it from 5 letters to 3. And I think that's all the changes I've made based off of your responses. Just summarizing why we have them scored differently. So, you know, the first tier, the priority is on their need and how much support they have to get this, to get a brand new program up and running. The second tier is the scoring is more focused on their sustainability and working to become more sustainable. And then the third focus is more on how they are demonstrating their sustainability through this innovation. So what do they expect to be, how do they expect to be more sustainable after this innovation is completed or started within those 2 years? And then also focusing on the equity accessible focus through the innovation. So this brings in some of the equity scoring criteria. So I feel confident that the way these are scored is actually getting at what the focus that we would like these grants to be in for the communities where they're at. So this would be meeting them where they're at, but challenging them to progress.
Well, this is a good time to pause to see if there are any questions from the SRAC or any clarification before we move to requesting a recommendation. And I'll just scroll to see if any hands are up. And Leanne, I'm not seeing any hands up. Are you?
I'm also not seeing any hands up. Oh, I do see one. Carolina.
And Brian. So Carolina, then Brian.
I have just a quick question. This probably was decided while I was on leave, but just how did you come up with the specifically like that split between the first tier and the second tier around the maximum like grant award? So 150 versus 100. Okay.
Yeah, good question. So I really did just take that million and try to split it as evenly as possible. But we know that through the PIP process with Leanne, that the consultation can be somewhere between 25,000 to 50,000 to work with a new community. And I know with the education portion, it might be a little bit more because it can be so complex for them to get moving and get a coordinator in place and get things set up. And so we know that for 2 years, you know, of 100,000 to pay a coordinator full time, you need somewhere around 50 to 75,000, and that would be kind of cutting it short as it is. So we're thinking 100 for 2 years plus the 50,000 consultation. That was. We're giving an emphasis of the 150,000 to new people. So it's kind of basically saying like, the newer you are, the more we can invest in getting you set up and getting you going. And then the more advanced you are, we're encouraging you to be more sustainable because we can't fund you forever, unfortunately. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help. Yeah, like I was wondering about that. So it's like the consultative component increases the cost. And then I think I included this question in my feedback, but just so just one additional thing. Will you at all be tracking for the consultative like awards, like who these jurisdictions are contracting for consultation, MWB status?
I'm sorry, W what?
Minority and women owned businesses. So I just want to know, like, if we're tracking, across the state, who's getting these contracts.
I can speak to that a little bit. Right now, we have a contract with Alta Planning and Design, who does most of our technical assistance. And we kind of combined all of our technical assistance into one large contract with subcontracts in order to simplify the management of the technical assistance and the collaboration between all of our technical assistants. In that process, we have a 3% DBE goal to have at least 3% of the contract going to DBE organizations. And we meet that 3%, and I think we might be able to exceed it in the future. But that's sort of where we are right now with DBE and contracting.
And I don't know what that acronym DBE stands for.
Oh, DBE is
Disadvantaged Business Enterprise.
Disadvantaged.
Okay. So the majority of the contracts, so most of the contracts will go to Alta because we already have like a statewide contract set up with them.
And then
Okay.
3% of that contract goes to subcontractors that are disadvantaged business enterprises, which is the language that ODOT uses in our contracting. And the 3% is a minimum requirement, I believe, for contracts over a certain amount. I don't actually know if our contract is over that amount yet, but we were striving to meet it and exceed it. Our hope is to exceed it in the future. As we gather more partners in to help do the work.
Okay, that specifically this piece around the contracting, probably it needs further analysis around, like, especially if we're trying to meet equity goals and making sure that we're providing opportunities for for communities that haven't been able to access these types of jobs, contracts, and so forth. So
Carolina,
always thinking about the jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think Hannah may be able to touch on that when she presents a little bit about how they're approaching it. But if we could move on to Brian, I'm being mindful of time and not to rush, but I think Hannah could touch on that just a little bit later on. So Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick clarifying question about the additional partners. Is that on top of the match that's required already, or is that aligned with that?
You mean like they would be giving match for the consultant? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, could that be seen as match, or I'm just trying to figure out, I see what you're going for, but could that potentially be used as match and therefore negating what you're going for within this, or what I'm trying to read within the additional partners aspect of this?
Well, it's not considered a match if I'm paying for it.
No, it's if applicant has at least one committed partner willing to contribute, so it's coming from an outside source. It's not you paying for it.
I guess I'm confused what you mean. If we're requiring them to have a partner and they use that, like the partner's volunteer time for match, or the partner, or you're talking about the partner's staff for match?
Yeah, both, and or because it's got money, time, and or services, letter of commitment.
Yeah, I mean,
question, if there are additional partners who are adding match or adding in kind, would that does that affect the scoring?
Yes,
Is that correct? Okay.
that's what I'm getting at.
No, it does not affect the scoring.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick stroll. No, I'm actually going to stay here. Bye. I'm going to scroll and see if there are any other questions. I'm not seeing any. So I think we could stop sharing the screen. And the question to the SRAC is, as Heidi has presented the scoring matrix for education with the 3 tiers, is the SRAC's recommendation to have staff move forward with it. Yes, 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 yes. I see Brock, I'm sorry, I can't quite see that thumb. Oh, good. Okay, and Carolina, thank you. Congratulations. We have 2 scoring matrices to get some money out the door, and especially for education in a brand new way, which is fantastic. Congratulations. So let's celebrate with a break for 10 minutes.
Yeah, I also have some really great news, which is now we are an hour ahead of our schedule. So congratulations, we might end before 4. So enjoy your break. I'm gonna put in the chat if anybody wants to watch a video while they're on their break, a video I haven't seen yet that some, I think it's Hillsborough submitted it as part of their, or Beaverton submitted it as part of their poster contest. It's 3 minutes. I've heard it's heartwarming and it will make your day. So I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. If you
great. And because we're ahead of time, could we stretch our break to 15 minutes?
Yeah.
So 2:55. Great. See everybody back. Thank you.
If anybody wants to stick around or is still around, I'm going to watch the video and I'll share my screen. So if you want to watch it with me, you can, but no worries if you're headed out.
Do it.
Do it. Okay, let me see if I do know how to share my screen, but I can't remember. There's something I have to.
Heidi, I love your background.
Thanks.
You're the queen of backgrounds.
I almost picked a picture of the Deschutes in the fall, but I didn't want to steal your thunder because I thought maybe you would have one.
No, you just give me an extra, give you an extra 2 thumbs up. I saw the Deschutes.
Okay,
so you're a motivating factor for our team to have more creative backgrounds.
Yeah, I think you should. You could still have commute options, on the background.
Totally.
All right, I'm going to watch a heartwarming video to celebrate our passing of the or our agreement around the scoring criteria.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Oh yes, this one is cute.
Can you hear the sound?
Yeah.
The kids in this one.
We wanted the contest to get that conversation started and keep going about things you can do outside, things you can do for fun, for exercise, for transportation.
It's a good way to have one-on-one time with your friends outside, but I really like catching up with my friends and hearing about what's new in their life. It all kind of comes together in the end, from having one childhood friend to, growing up and being an independent person.
This is the first time we've done a countywide poster art contest. We wanted to promote awareness of our Safe Routes program. We wanted families to have conversations about walking and biking, and we also wanted kids to have a creative outlet.
It's super encouraging and exciting to see that kids are still very much drawn to the natural world. And that includes creating and playing and learning from nature, learning from other people and each other, to use their imaginations, to think creatively, to use their hands.
This exhibit is a great example of what we wanted the contest to do, was to kind of be a project that a whole class could work on. And so Ms. Wright from Hallinan Elementary in Lake Oswego had 14 entries from her class. This exhibit highlights that collection from that classroom.
To find out that they had both won, of course, was, you know, earth-shattering news around here these days.
Adeline, Caitlin, and Avery were the first place winners.
I was really excited. I was super surprised. Freaking out. I had a really fun time doing it.
Kids are great artists and they just are so creative. We're going to do another contest next year and we really hope that a lot of people enter. Getting involved in Safe Routes programs at your school community is a great idea. It can be a very fun event. It can provide education. There's a lot of opportunities for grants and projects to be funded. Whether you're a parent or a teacher or a student, you can be involved in the Safe Routes program because there's something for everybody.
Oh my gosh, it is fate that I attended this meeting as a guest. Hi, it's Nicole.
Oh, Nicole,
work, Nicole.
That is a great video. Those kids are so cute. The fact that they're talking about being responsible adults, I love it.
That's adorable.
We can hope. We can hope.
Yeah, that was adorable.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, thanks Nicole for pulling that together and making the video and doing a great poster contest.
Thanks. Yeah, ironic that our press release just went out yesterday for 2022. So thank you all for your work and keeping the ball rolling on all levels of Safe Routes.
Nicole, I like how one of your comments was that the art contest creates conversation within the home around active transportation. I think that's a really cool take on it that I hadn't really thought about before. So nice. That's good.
Yeah, we got a lot of, there was a lot of unique ways to think about how people move around no matter how near or far from their home, especially, the last 18, 20 months. So yeah, it's not just because a lot of people just say, this isn't relevant to me because I don't walk or roll to school. And it's like, well, but you walk or roll and get around and it's about so much more than just, that one little commute. So.
Well, and it's definitely a great tool to pull in people that you might not normally pull in with some of the other events. So it's a way to kind of be more inclusive of families and kids. So I love it.
Yeah, and we definitely touched on, why do you walk and bike and roll? For climate, for community, for fun, so all the reasons. Yeah, thanks for playing that, guys.
Yeah.
Very cool. We should share that with the group. Oh, no, it's just Hannah and I. Hi, Hannah. Hannah, did you see our new newsletter format?
Very slick. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's going to be a good change to the Safe Routes one if y'all are open to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
More like teasers and then the information's on the website instead of all just kind of there.
Maybe to graphics and away from copy is good.
Oh, Brian, I do like your new newsletter. Very nice.
Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah, we put together a new banner,
yeah,
graphics, and just made it simpler. Thanks for saying something.
yeah, I really, and I like the new logo. I've been meaning to tell you that. It's catchy. And you have all these moats. You got a dog. Is that your dog?
It should be. Yeah, I'm really working on our messaging, communications, graphic, all of that.
Yeah.
Just kind of updating it and
Uh-huh.
making it easier for folks to take in. So thanks. I'll pass it along to the team.
It's really, and you know what I like about it is it just the images of the buildings denotes work, home. I mean, it's really nicely done. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we tried to make the buildings any building, not a specific type of building. So it could be anywhere that you're going to, really.
And Alta's got a new logo, doesn't it, Hannah?
We sort of do. We have, yeah, no, we do. We totally do. And our teal, modern teal.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely this time of year, teal. Hi, Steve, you're back.
Yes.
Back from your travels.
Yes.
How's your knee or your leg?
The knee that had work done on it, I had surgery done on it. It's doing fine. My other knee started bothering me on our trip.
Oh.
But we'll see if that one gets cleared up. I don't know if it's kind of like almost like I twisted that knee, my right knee and hip or something when I was trying to sleep on the plane on the way over to between Dallas and Paris. So,
oh no.
But that did not stop me from walking and doing everything we love to do there. So,
yeah, of course not.
Steve, you got to Paris?
Yeah.
When did you go? Last week? Okay. Yep. Oh, that's so great. I've got a friend who is going on Thursday with her 6-year-old son, and I just saw like all the headlines in the New York Times about like Christmas market's gonna close because of COVID rates going up, and I was like, oh no, she's gonna like get there and everything's gonna shut down. So.
Paris is, and France in general, but Paris especially is 87.5% vaccinated. So their rates are pretty good, but the countries all around them numbers are going up.
Yeah.
Which is not good. But I could say that where we were, everywhere we went, people were wearing their masks. They were being very responsible and didn't have any issues. And if you want to go into a restaurant or to any events, you have to have what they call the pass sanitaire, which is you have to go through a whole process to get that process through. Which, if by the way they have not gotten that yet, the trick to get it is you need to upload all your documents only in PDF, even though they say they accept other formats, only PDF, and you need to do it during hours that their normal office hours will be open. Because we had ours in for like probably 6 or 8 weeks, no response. Then we did it one morning when we knew they were open, and we had the response back and the approval within literally like 2 minutes.
Good tip, thanks. I'll pass it on.
Okay, I think we're almost ready at 2:55, and Leanne, I think we're only 20 minutes ahead.
I know, we're not an hour.
I know.
Over the break, I was like, no, I overpromised and I'm going to under-deliver, which I hate. I like the other way. I should have kept my big mouth shut.
I was thinking time warp. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I mislooked at the agenda and then I realized my mistake.
It's still a good place to be.
Still a good place to be. No. So, yeah.
So, are we ready?
Can folks who are back turn your videos on really quickly so that we can see that you're back in the room? Welcome back, Noel, Danny, Steve, Trevor, Lauren, Brian. Heidi's back, Sunny's back. Feel like that's a pretty good critical mass. Hannah's got a lot of great information, so I just want to make sure we get as many people as we can, but I will share the screen. Hi,
And
Kim.
just as we're leading into this, there is a small group discussion as a part of this next section.
Yes. So welcome back, everyone. Our next section is our education statewide program, which is the other 50% of the education funds. Priority outreach and engagement analysis. So we've been doing a lot of work to analyze our programs and who we're reaching and who we're not reaching. And also planning and design and our partners have been working on that analysis for us and are helping us determine how we can shift how we do business in order to better engage communities. So I'll pass it off to Hannah.
Thanks so much, Leanne, and everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of our technical assistance work. And we're really hoping to get some direction on the next steps for this. And I'm excited. This feels super timely with the other presentations that we heard today in the meeting. And in particular, I'm hoping that some of this work that we've done can inform your responses to some of the equity questions that Robin posed earlier. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of context as we move into this. So over the last summer, the Odot Safe Routes to School technical assistance team formed these education hubs. And they're groups of Safe Routes to School practitioners and others who are working on similar efforts and interested in starting to do Safe Routes to Schools. We meet monthly via Zoom, and sometimes we have a formal agenda, sometimes it's more of a ad hoc office hours, and we're really encouraging, we're building a community of folks around Safe Routes to Schools. We're asking people, providing a space to ask questions, share their successes, and to get technical assistance from our team. And these hubs are really complementing the other education programming that we're offering on the statewide level, which includes this an about to be updated website, monthly training webinars that just this week we had a webinar about poster contests where we showed the video that from Nicole. Monthly themes. Actually on Tuesday was our first annual Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day, and other regular statewide campaigns and activities. So today we wanted to talk about the Priority Outreach and Engagement Plan, which is really intended, and next slide please, which is really intended to guide some of our work on the hubs. So based on the advisory committee guidance over earlier this year, one of the key equity actions that came out of our assessment is to really better understand who we're reaching with the statewide programming and who isn't being reached very well. So that's why Priority Outreach and Engagement Plan, really thinking about who's left out of our current model and how can we reach them better. Often at Safe Routes, we take this approach of kind of throwing ideas out. We throw out surveys, opportunities, and kind of say, please join us in doing this thing, download these materials. But who can take advantage of that? It's usually many of the same communities. And so we really want to be more intentional about providing our services based on need and not who has the time to respond. And then what's going to come out of this Priority Outreach Engagement Plan is really going to guide how the technical assistance providers spend our time, so we can identify new partners and staff who can serve these communities. And I should say, so Alta is the prime consultant on the contract, but we're very closely working with Community Options and Brian's team and the Street Trust, as well as Chris, and some other folks. But this is also an opportunity to identify what other organizations might we want to bring onto the team and have that level of engagement as well. So right now we're in this sort of development phase of this project. It's a great time to hear your thoughts about how we're headed, where we're headed with this. We want your input on the process, and then you'll be able to review our findings early next year. I think we'll be coming back in January with some of the findings. So there's two pieces to this. The first is the power analysis, and we've brought on Anita Yap with Multicultural Collaborative to facilitate power analysis meetings with each of the hubs. We just wrapped up the third one of those this morning. So this spectrum of public participation, I think Robin alluded to in the presentation earlier, about really thinking about how, of the partners that we're working with, are we merely keeping them informed of what we're doing? Are we consulting them and asking for feedback via a survey? Are we really involving them in decisions? Are we collaborating with them in meaningful ways? And then I think, one opportunity we have in terms of empowerment is to really bring those organizations onto our team so they're funded to deliver safe routes to school activities through these different funding sources. So next slide. The power analysis, if you're not familiar with this, really thinks about partners and we're doing it again with the hub, so at the local safe routes to school practitioner level, really thinking about specific partners as well as like groups of within the community, how much they're impacted by safe routes to schools and our decisions, and how much influence they have on the decisions, and really trying to understand which organizations are greatly impacted but maybe don't have a lot of influence yet, and how can we maybe increase that. So next slide is an example of one of our power analysis outcomes, or with I think this one represents Tigard, Portland, Multnomah County, and the brainstorm and sticky notes and everything that we did with them earlier in the month. And so this helps us identify specific organizations that we might work with, as well as different kinds of communities that we want to find those organizations and start sort of talking with them about how we might be able to partner. So we'll be, working more on that piece of it. That's kind of the qualitative piece. And then we wanted to really integrate quantitative data and better understand who is the community that we're trying to serve, and then how are we serving them so far. So enter the school database. And sorry, the next part is a little bit more technical and more numbers, but hopefully this is, like I said, going to provide some of that information that will help answer some of these questions. So as I go through the next slides, please consider these questions. What additional data might be useful for this database? And then also what non-data considerations should we incorporate? And in the interest of time, I think we were going to have you put notes into the chat box if you have thoughts about these things. We really want to emphasize that we're trying to get a holistic picture of who we're serving and who we aren't serving by considering both qualitative and quantitative data sources. So onto the data. This is the database that we've created. We have each school is its own row, and then we've incorporated data that we can get publicly and from ODE, the Department of Education, by school and by district, and some other demographic information, enrollment numbers, things like that, and languages spoken. So, there's some limitations that we recognize with this data set, but we're really trying to get as much information in here so then we can slice and dice it in different ways and better understand which populations there are of students that we want to be reaching. So one thing that I want to be super clear about is when I talk about participation for the purpose of this analysis, we're really talking about schools that completed the recognition level program survey. And if you're not familiar with that, we have on the education side, we have a program where schools can submit and say what activities they've done, and then they can be recognized as gold or silver, or kind of with what activities they've been engaged with. We haven't been doing a lot of promotion of it right now, but we have had some schools register for it. It's something that's going to be coming in the spring, probably as things hopefully return to normal a little bit more. But we also including schools that completed walk and roll registration. Folks who are not included as participating are schools that are involved with local programs in Portland or in UT Springfield or in Clackamas County that don't also engage with the Odot Safe Routes program. So that's something we'd like to do in the future, but I just wanted to caveat that participation isn't a full view of things right now, but it's the start. So next I wanted to talk about some of the findings, and this is a lot of information. So, really, again, we want to kind of come back to like, do we have the right data to answer the questions? We're not necessarily answering the questions right now, but thinking about what the data that we have and what, how to make this most useful. So preliminary results. We have 22% of schools throughout the state of Oregon have participated in the program. There's almost 14,000 schools, so 22% is pretty decent. So then breaking it down by, can you go, to the next slide. So then breaking it down by urban and rural, and for the purpose of this analysis, we're looking at schools within an MPO, are urban, and outside are rural. Unsurprisingly, we see substantially more schools that are urban are participating than rural schools. In the next slide, it shows the breakdown by region. And here you can see that in terms of total numbers of schools, we have the highest numbers in regions 1 and 2. But if you're looking at the percentage of schools in the region, region 4 is actually pretty well represented. So this kind of helps look at, where might we be focusing some more of our time and resources in encouraging schools to apply for the funds or to bring them into the hubs as well. So then we start getting into looking at Title I status. And so of the participating schools, 30% are Title I. We do see that 36% of the non-participating schools, but 56% of participating schools are Title I. So it's, again, a lot of numbers, but the bottom line here is that there's a higher proportion of Title I schools among the participating schools. So that indicates that we're kind of successfully reaching those schools, but of course there's always room for improvement. And then in the next slide, you can see the breakdown of urban and rural. And again, rural Title I schools are pretty underrepresented compared to urban Title I schools. So the next several slides, there's a lot of information. But I just wanted to, provide these that if you want to, when we move into the breakout sessions, you will have access to the presentation if you want to kind of dive into your own region and look at the data. And I see Chris had a question. Yes, the data does not reflect the construction program, and it's only participation in education programs, specifically signing up for Walk and Roll to School Day or the recognition program. So, the breakdown by region, I'll let you kind of come back to if you're interested. The next slide shows the number of students of different racial and ethnic groups. This is total students and students at participating schools versus students at non-participating schools. And I think here it's important to note that even if the school participated or through a Walk and Roll to School Day, we don't necessarily know that those students, that the different populations of students were engaged as well as we want them to be. But this is, the beginnings of this kind of understanding that we're trying to go for. Excuse me. But here we can see that American Indian and Alaska Native students are pretty significantly underrepresented among the participating schools. Then slicing and dicing the data in a couple of different ways, we actually don't see a lot of difference in terms of participating versus non-participating schools in criteria like students who qualify for free and reduced price meals, students who are currently English language learners, chronic absenteeism, or special education. But that's something, again, that maybe if we start like slicing and dicing the data in different ways or looking at more community level data, there may be some more interesting patterns that we can see. Next, we have the languages spoken by students. And I think, unsurprisingly, English is the top one, and Spanish is by a large margin the second most spoken language in the state of Oregon. But in terms of third, Russian, Vietnamese, and Chinese are pretty much tied, which can help kind of guide what languages we're translating materials into, or what kind of, the interpreters we might want to work with. The next slide shows that same breakdown by region. Don't expect you to read this right now, but wanted to provide it for future reference if you want to see it. So that's just like a quick snapshot of some of the data, some of the analysis that we can do from this database that we've compiled. In terms of the next steps with this effort, we're going to be finishing the power analysis workshops and writing up our findings with that. We're developing this priority outreach.
Is it important? Like, trying to listen to the meeting. Okay, go ahead.
Question?
So I found what I want for my birthday.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
I think you're not on mute, Rob. I'm going to mute you.
Sorry. Okay, so we're developing this priority outreach engagement plan using both the findings from the power analysis and from this equity needs analysis that we're doing. And so that's going to really guide our work as the hubs, like I said before, in terms of who we should be reaching out to, what partners do we want to engage, and maybe even what partners can we bring on to fund to do more outreach for safe routes. One of the other big things that we'd like to do is refine that participation piece because it is so crucial to our understanding of some of those numbers. And so we'll be able to be including the numbers of schools involved in bike ped safety education as we're rolling that out in the spring. We're going to be doing a big push for the school recognition levels. The new website is going to really reinforce that and celebrate that. And then we do want to include local safe routes to school programming. So all those schools that are working on our great local programs aren't excluded from this analysis. So that was a lot. Are there any questions before we move on to the breakouts?
I'm not seeing any questions.
Hannah, it's Heidi. I was just wondering if when you said 14,000 schools, are you talking about like K through 8?
Sorry, 1,400 and K through, it should be K through 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course, as a Region 5 resident, I know where ODOT Region 5 is. Where is Region 3?
Sorry?
Where is
Region 3 is the southern and eastern hub. It's kind of been sorry. Do you want to go back to the hub map,
yeah.
Leanne? We talked to practitioners about who they kind of wanted to be working with in terms of like how the messaging and the outreach felt kind of similar. And we ended up putting a Region 1 all together. So that's Metro plus the Estacada and Sandy and Hood River, and then the Coast and Valley, and then Southern and Eastern. And this is something that we're hoping to, as we continue this work, continue to break into smaller hubs to be able to have, more regional groups.
And for the ODOT regions, like ideally we'd love to have a hub for each region. We just don't have enough funding right now to make that happen. However, the Region 3 that you were asking about, Danny, is on this slide. It's like kind of below the green area, but it includes Douglas, Coos, Curry, Josephine, Jackson counties. So it's kind of like the southwest corner of the state is all Region 3. Are folks familiar with the other regions? Does anyone want a verbal description of the other 2 regions while we've got a map out that lists all the counties?
And basically, I know that 5 is basically the eastern third of the state, right, and 4 is basically the center third of the state. And then the other 3 are, the one you mentioned, but I know the other 3 are on the west side of the Cascades.
It looks like Rob has a question or a comment.
Yeah, Hannah, you said something earlier and you kind of trailed off at the end, so I didn't quite understand everything you were saying. It was about something about Metro, Clackamas County, and Eugene, Springfield, that they have their own programs and they're treated a little differently through this process. And I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying.
Yeah, thanks for following up on that. Those were just examples. It was not a comprehensive list, but I just wanted to reinforce that when I was showing those charts about participation, It's only schools that have signed up for the ODOT walk and roll to school day. Many schools participate in a local walk and roll to school day through PDOT or through Eugene Springfield, and they're not necessarily encouraged to sign up through ODOT also. So we don't have that list, but we'd like to start incorporating it. Does that make sense?
So just to be clear, all the charts you were showing, those schools would be in the non-participating category.
Right. If they did not sign up for the ODOT program, then they would not be shown as participating.
Yeah, I think it would be really important to get that data because it's really, you know, it would help to kind of flesh out more the bigger picture of what we're talking about. For sure.
Yeah, Rob, that's a good point. And we just had to go with what we had. And unfortunately, some of the real advanced programs tend to not necessarily sign up each and every school. They, like Sarah Mazie, will tell them how many schools she's working with, but not necessarily which ones. And so the names of them don't actually haven't actually made it on to the list. But yes, point taken, like we'd love to have a more, you know, comprehensive, you know, picture of it. This is just baseline data that we have.
Well, and I know, like, for one, you know, Sarah in particular is very focused on Title I schools. So I think it would help to reinforce like kind of where we're trying to go with this. All right, thank you.
I think that's a really good point you brought up. Thanks, Rob. And I do think that also means that when you look at the breakdown of urban versus rural Title I schools that are involved, I imagine even more urban Title I schools that are being involved in local safe routes programs. So, oh, Carolina, you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. So for the education component of Safe Routes to School, Heidi, did you say 50% is going to that, like going to the 3 tiers, you know, funding pot, and then does the other 50% go to the hubs?
It doesn't go all to the hubs, but the funding of the hubs comes from that bucket. The rest of it is spent through my program in terms of statewide campaigns and messaging, and then development of materials, and then like our storeroom supply of free materials for everyone. So not all of the 50% goes to the hub work, but the hub work is paid through that bucket.
Okay, do you know a percentage more or less?
I think that's in a previous slide, a previous presentation when you were determining when the SRAC was giving a recommendation of 50% and 50%. So if it's not at the top of your head, we certainly, Carolina, can go back and find that slide from a previous meeting.
Yeah, I definitely, it's probably close to a third, but I don't want to say an exact amount just because I don't have it off the top of my head. But I can definitely get back to you on that.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I just had forgotten like how everything was divided, but that helps orient me. Thanks, Heidi.
I'll share too that, you know, we have like a set aside for the hub work in our contract, and we haven't been doing quite as much on that as we'd like to be, and that's a lot because of the you know, school closures in the fall and things like that. And so this does give us the opportunity to do this power analysis, and then we really do, you know, we have hours allocated to doing outreach, and really once we've identified some of these organizations we want to work with, to calling them and trying to bring them into the Safe Route School. Well, Leanne, would you be willing to go back to the second to last slide? We wanted to move into a breakout group and get your input on what are some of the ways this information could guide future statewide technical assistance engagement, services, and resources. And I wanted to offer an example as you start thinking about that. We know that, like I said, Spanish is by far and away the second most commonly spoken language with students in Oregon. And so we are doing a concerted effort to have more materials translated And as part of our website refresh, we're creating a Spanish language webpage and a translation request form. And then we also created this glossary of Safe Routes to School terms, so we can be consistently translating Safe Routes to School specific phrases in the same way across the state. So that's just one example of, you know, identifying an issue and then the kinds of activities we might do to based on the information we have.
So we're going to break out into small groups. So there'll be 4 groups, each facilitated by a staffer or a partner who will take notes. And in the chat box, I added a link to this presentation so that you can download it and look back at the slides during this time if you'd like to. Just to note that that is actually linked to a slightly older presentation than the one that we went through today. So like some other slides that like Heidi presented on will be slightly different, but the Hannah slides will be exactly the same. So we did some last minute tweaks right before the meeting. So Tammy, can you put us into breakout groups, please?
It's scheduled to get a booster tomorrow. It doesn't, well, it doesn't ask any questions. And that's what Chris was saying. I just texted her. I said, did Tracy and Joel go there? Because I'm wondering if you get there and they ask me something. I don't want to have to lie. They're going to have all confused about it. Oh, I thought. Anyway. They were pretty close to approving it, so I'm just going to wait. She's going, Chris is going in next week, so I asked her if she knows.
And she's going to Costco tomorrow.
She said, I booked it online, I didn't have to lie. And I can see that because I just went through the thing and I get to it, it's like, what do you want? I said, Moderna booster, if I get to pick. And they have appointments available like all day tomorrow and Saturday and next week. And well, and she said that Joel said something about they were having to throw some doses away because they were going tab. So I mean, if that's the case, I'd rather get a booster than have them thrown away. But anyway.
Good nap?
Yeah, hey, huh?
Did you get a good nap? You slept through that presentation, didn't you?
We talked about this. We're gonna do this. Aaron, do you want to do? Well, we have asparagus, so we should use that up. Cook it all up, whatever it is, and then that's Chris.
What are you barking at? No. Leave my stuff alone.
Okay, and we're back. Leanne's back. Great. Leanne, did you, or Hannah, you want to do a debrief now, just quickly about how it could be used?
Sure. Should we just do a quick, the facilitator? We had a lot of different ideas in our group, and I think in particular, passing money on to communities, finding ways to make it worth their time, and really thinking about why volunteers would be participating, and really thinking about a wide range of community groups to reach. I'll leave it there.
And I'll chime in after you. From our group, we were really talking about filling in the local data gaps. It's something that Rob touched on, but also identifying gaps in programs or services and how they're reaching it, and that it might affect how there's some targeted outreach for communities that may not be applying, but now this information is highlighting, and help recognize the diversity in a service area, and identify new potential hubs. Brian's area is enormous, and so potentially this data could really help look at how to carve out another hub on the west side, perhaps. And the final thing is filling in where there's available funding and matching, kind of helping be matchmakers for that. Dana, Sunny, or Brian, anything else to add? All right, okay.
Heidi, would you like to go next?
Yeah. There was some crossover from what you guys mentioned. I think one of the coolest parts of this was different discussion around meeting communities where they are in a cultural sense. So rather than it being just a top level outreach of saying through an email or some kind of blast, you know, in the virtual world, more of meeting people where they are in things that are meaningful for them. So the language rise interpreters, doing stuff at a grassroots level, getting a key informant from that community that can really kind of help you engage with that community, and thinking about like interpreters and offering food or some kind of way of sponsorship with health, with childcare, and just meeting people where they are. And this can help us get to that. Example of this is knowing like some of the other languages in that area, and maybe coming to meeting with folks within those ethnic backgrounds, and just kind of getting a better feel for what's important to those people, and what's important in their surroundings and their culture. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I think everything else was similar to what you guys were talking about too.
We had a good discussion with Zhao, Dana, Brock, and Mavis, and we talked a lot about messaging, where like walking and biking might not be the best messaging, but wellness program or life skills might be better messaging. Sort of breaking it down and making it simple for schools. Like you might not need a full-blown safe routes program. Like what's a simple first step? We've been seeing some energy against walking and biking to school, and sort of like the messaging that a good parent does not put their kids out there in the cold and wet weather. And so how to address like that idea. We had some ideas around helping provide proper gear for kids to walk and roll to school. Like you need a good rain jacket and an umbrella and a warm hat. Like if there are families that don't have the right gear, that might be really hard to get them outside, or for them to get outside, and it might be hard to access that gear. An idea to have a Safe Routes to School roadshow around the state to like reach some communities that haven't seen Safe Routes to School before. They might not know what it looks like. And also some feedback from a school that wished that there was more safety education shared, particularly for parents. So any sort of student safety messaging that could go out to parents and commuters who travel like through school zones. So a lot of like real tangible ideas came out of the group. I think that's all of our report back. So, but we didn't sort of pause to see that we caught everything. So if there is anything else that wasn't reflected, love to hear it.
I was going to say for my group as well, I feel like I kind of quickly went through.
Yeah, I think we all did. So we'll just
repeating what we just did. So in particular, I just wanted to call on Steve and Lauren and Rob and Carlina, if you had anything you wanted to add.
Nothing other than what has already been shared. I mean, in just that general context, and just probably the other piece is just really trying to understand from a cultural basis of of how messages are received beyond just the language. And that's the one thing I wanted to emphasize on that too, is taking time to understand and also find ways to listen to what their concerns are as well, because there may be a different perspective of what is considered unsafe. And so that's something else too to include.
Great. We've almost caught up on our meeting agenda. I misspoke earlier. Whenever I told everyone we were an hour ahead, we were not. I was wrong. I apologize. And now we're almost back to our regular schedule, but we're 5 minutes ahead, which I think is something we can celebrate. But happy to move on, or happy to spend a little bit more time here if anyone has any more comments.
I just put it in the chat, but my internet failed for the exact duration of that breakout session. So I was just gonna say, I think it sounded like it came up in a couple of groups, having those like key community informants as part of the process. Those people, my 2 cents is those people should be paid. They shouldn't be volunteers. They are a critical, really important part of the process, and a really good way to show value is value them. Give them preferably a living wage job.
Good.
This is Catalina. I was going to add just one final idea that I'd like to see is just also with thinking about volunteers that are coming from, underserved communities, BIPOC communities, is providing some type of official letter from ODOT, just thanking them for taking the time to coordinate these activities at their schools. It's just I go back to that, for different reasons. I think it's just really important to acknowledge their work in an official way, where they can document that they're providing, that they're giving back to their communities and being active in civic activities.
I'll just share that I made the suggestion that there be some sharing of how communities can set up free bikes for kids programs. That's something we have. I don't know how many there are around the state. We have one in the Eugene Springfield area, and helps get bikes to low income kids, because obviously if we're teaching kids how to bike to school safely, if they don't have a bike, they can't do that. So I just think that would be a great program to see how can we roll it out to more parts of the state. Maybe we could use some of the federal money coming in to get low-income kids bikes.
I know our DCFS, the tribal DCFS, does that for foster kids, but I don't know what other programs are around for just low-income kids.
That's great.
Well, there'll be opportunities to also chime in as more data comes in, as it's filled out. And in January, Hannah, do you want to just recap what you'll be sharing with the SREC?
Yes, and thank you. In January, we'll have Anita Yap from Multicultural Collaboratives come and lead a power analysis process with you all. And then we'll probably be providing an update on some of the needs assessment information that we have. And that'll really guide, like I said, some of the next steps with our outreach and engagement through the hubs and through the other statewide services. So thank you all so much for your thoughts on this. This is really helpful. And in particular, I think we have some very concrete, specific next steps that we can pursue.
Can I just ask a question real quick? Is there any way we can ask the parents why they're not having their kids walk and bike to school, and get kind of their take on the whole thing? Because we're really pushing at the kids, particularly the younger kids, and a lot of them are like, oh yeah, I really want to ride my bike to school, but my mom says it's dangerous, or this is happening, or that is happening. And so if maybe we can alleviate some of those, find out what those barriers are and alleviate some of them, it might be marvelous.
Absolutely. We have There is a Safe Routes to School parent caregiver survey that we use. We're from the Statewide group. We are helping communities that have received the competitive construction grant that have been identified for before and after studies. We're helping them collect that data before and after the construction projects. And then a lot of the locally funded programs, all of the Metro funded ones, I know Eugene and Springfield have a very robust data collection process that includes that parent data collection. So kind of in terms of that piece, absolutely, we're trying to understand why parents are concerned and address those concerns. And then on the other side, we're also trying to do more coordination with travel options programming and really addressing, like you said, parent concerns and in part that barrier of parents have to take their kid to school and then continue on to work. And so by working together with travel options groups, we can address like the parents piece of the transportation puzzle along with the students. So that's something that we're trying to do more of that's a little bit new.
Hey, look forward to January. That'll be interesting. Leanne, I think we're getting into the, like a horse to the barn. I think we're getting to the end of the meeting.
Yay. Okay, we're getting there. These are always marathons. So thanks for hanging with us. We're almost to the end. I wanted to do, in our wrap up, I wanted to do a quick overview of the 2022 SRAC work plan. Now that we have our dates filled in and ready to go, in January, we'll be doing that equity power analysis activity with Anita. You'll get to meet our DMV administrator, who's now in charge of the Safe Routes to School education side of the programming in the Department of Motor Vehicles, Administrator Amy Joyce. We'll talk about the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee recruitment, which I also think really fits into these conversations around equity and leading with race. And Carolina, Rob, and I have some suggestions for how we can make that process a little more open. And we also have a new thing at ODOT, which is the Equitable Compensation Program. So we can compensate committee members moving forward that aren't compensated through their job to be on the committee. So I'm working, I think Mavis might be one of the only ones on this committee who is not compensated. So we're working to get that for her. So if anyone else on this committee is not compensated for your time, please let me know. We have a process now to be able to do that. And I think that will really help with recruitment. But I'll talk more about that in January. I'm very excited about it. In March, we'll prep for our education grant recommendation. In April, you'll make that recommendation using the new scoring criteria. In July, we anticipate having an time for an equity workshop. We're not exactly sure what that'll look like yet. So if you have any ideas for that, please let me know. But we have time for that in July. September and October and November will be all around construction projects. So September we'll prep for our grant recommendation for construction, and November we'll make that recommendation with that optional travel meeting in October to go visit a completed project as well as see some education programming. Lots of good work. So here is the 2022 draft solicitation schedule with lots of words on a screen. You'll notice that our applications will be open in February and March for all three programs, the education program, all the tiers to that, the Safe Routes to School construction program, as well as the planning assistance program that we call the project identification program, or the PIP. So this is the year where the magic is happening. The alignment is finally happening. Heidi and I have been waiting like 4 years for this to line up to where we can run our application process at the same time. So hopefully that will make it easier for people to apply, to have it all open at once. We also like to pause at these meetings and have a little bit of like a moment of celebration and do some program highlights. So I really want to, I'll save my favorite one for last. I don't have a favorite actually, but anyway, well, it doesn't matter what I like the best, but we are doing many things to celebrate. The Crook, where we funded a new rapid response grant in Crook County at the middle for students at the middle school. We're super excited to roll out the Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day, which celebrates the Walk to School of Ruby Bridges, who integrated her school in Louisiana by herself as a kindergartner. The last highlight is I really want to say thank you to everybody for your work and your engagement and commitment during this unprecedented time. And the reason I saved this one for last is because I wanted to do a group photo. So I want to turn stop sharing the screen for a second and ask people to, committee members, to turn your cameras on. And I am going to use a snippet tool to try to take a screenshot of all of us, and if folks are okay with that. So let's say I'm gonna do a countdown. So 1, 2, 3, smile. And that doesn't work for me. Whatever reason, it like freezes as soon as I open the snippet tool. So we're gonna do it a little bit differently, where I'm gonna take a picture with my phone. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for just your continued hard work. Like, here we go. We've approved 2 more funding scoring criteria. Just so much is happening around Safe Routes to School right now, and we're really appreciative of your time and commitment during a global pandemic and through all the changes that are happening in our lives and in the world. Next meeting is January 20th, and we generally like to pause and do a member check-in. So I think that's all my slides. You guys know me and Heidi's contact information by now. So I'm going to escape out of this presentation and let Chris wrap us up with a quick check-in with committee members.
Yeah, I think right now, after close to a 3-hour meeting, if you want to say something or you want to put it in the chat box, or if you don't have anything to say, that is your prerogative. But I don't think we need to popcorn around right now. If what's always helpful is what could have been better, what would you like more of, what can we always make these meetings take advantage of your time and make them as valuable as possible. So whether you want to put it in the chat box, say it now, respond to Leanne later, that would be very helpful. So with that, I'm going to ask Rob. I'm gently lobbing it back over to Rob.
Well, thanks for a productive meeting, everybody. It's amazing like how much Leanne and Heidi pack into these agendas, but you guys really keep it moving along, and I just really appreciate it. And Dana just posted that she loves the breakout rooms, and I do too. It's just the combination of like the little one-on-ones at the beginning and the breakout rooms. I think you guys just do a fabulous job. So thank you for that, and thank you for everyone's participation and thoughtful comments today. And hope everyone has a good holiday season, because we won't see each other again till January. So looking forward to another good meeting when we see each other again.
Great.
Thanks.
There's some, we'll have some jokes ready next time. Yeah. Okay. With that, Leanne, any
now
jokes?
I'm excited. Like, what joke?
Yeah.
Jokes. Super stoked. Lots of gratitude for all of you, friends, committee members, other visitors on the meeting, ODOT staff that work on Safe Routes to School. Just tons of gratitude for you all. So thank you for your time and commitment. I hope you have, like Chris said, a wonderful holiday season, and hope to see you someday soon. That might not be on a computer screen. So
Nice.
Anyway,
Thank you,
warmest
everyone.
regards, best wishes.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Heidi, can you stay on?
Oh, of course.
Thank you.